Briefly introduce the grandmother's life before the abuse began. A seemingly normal home, loving memories, and trust within the family. Set the emotional tone. Trust, love, and routine shattered by betrayal. I want to take you back to a time when life was quieter, slower, and in many ways beautiful. I was just a grandmother trying to enjoy the final chapters of a long life. The kind filled with birthdays, Sunday dinners, and quiet mornings with a cup of tea by the window. My husband and I had worked hard all our lives. We raised our children the best we could. We sacrificed, we prayed, we believed in family. And for a long while, I truly thought we had done all right. I thought the hardest parts of parenting were behind us. I thought love, especially from your own child, was something you could count on. I was wrong. Our youngest son had moved back in with us a few years ago. He'd fallen on hard times. Job troubles, a divorce. Life just hadn't gone the way he wanted. And of course we welcomed him. That's what mothers do, right? You don't stop being a mother just because your child is grown. He needed us and I couldn't say no. I didn't want to say no. I still remembered the boy I used to rock to sleep. The one who used to draw me pictures and ask for one more bedtime story. I held on to that image. First, things were fine. He stayed in the guest room, helped out around the house when he felt up to it, and mostly kept to himself. I won't lie. There were moments where I could feel something was off. He was more irritable than I remembered, less patient, sometimes cruel in the way he spoke. But I chalked it up to stress, to depression. I told myself it was temporary. I even made excuses for him to my husband, saying things like, "He just needs time," or "He's trying, he really is." I wanted to believe that. I needed to believe that. Looking back, I realize now how much I missed. Little signs. The way he'd avoid eye contact. The way he'd drink more than he used to. The way I began to feel uneasy in my own home. A feeling I couldn't quite explain. At the time, I didn't know how to describe it. It wasn't fear exactly. It was something quieter, more insidious. Like the air had shifted. Like my own home wasn't entirely safe anymore. But I still clung to that hope. Hope that love could fix anything. That if I just kept loving him enough, if I just gave him more space, more patience, more of myself, he would find his way back to being that sweet boy. We mothers. We do that, don't we? We carry the best version of our children in our hearts, even when they've long stopped being that person. I remember a specific night. It seemed like any other. My husband had gone to bed early, and I stayed up a little later watching the television. I made myself some tea, folded a few clothes, then turned off the lights and went to bed. Just like every night. Nothing unusual. Nothing to warn me of what was to come. And yet, that night changed everything. It's hard to explain the feeling of your world breaking while you sleep. To wake up confused, disoriented, unsure if what you're feeling is real or some terrible dream. The realization didn't come in one instant. Came in waves. Disbelief, shame, horror, and then a terrible, terrible silence. I didn't tell my husband at first. I couldn't. I didn't even tell myself the truth out loud. I blamed myself, questioned my memory. Maybe I was confused. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe I was going crazy. But deep down I knew. A mother always knows. In those first days I still made him breakfast. I still said good morning. I still tried to smile. Can you imagine that? Smiling at the person who's hurt you in the worst possible way. But I did it. Because I didn't know what else to do. 'Cause fear makes you small. Because betrayal makes you quiet. And because when the person who's harmed you is your own child, there are no rules. No guidebook. Just a terrible emptiness and a desperate wish to wake up and find it was all just a mistake. But it wasn't a mistake. It was real. And even though I didn't know it yet, the truth was about to come to light. And with it, everything would change. That was the last night I would ever go to bed believing I was safe in my own home. There's something indescribable about the moment when your mind stops protecting you from the truth. When the confusion starts to clear, and what you're left with is something you don't want to believe. Something you'd give anything not to be real. For a while after that night I tried to push it down. I tried to pretend it hadn't happened. Maybe it was a bad dream. Maybe it was stress. Maybe I was just tired. You find yourself reaching for any explanation that doesn't involve the word abuse. That doesn't involve your son. But denial is like a thin blanket in the middle of winter. It can't keep the cold out forever. The signs kept coming. Small things at first. I started waking up with bruises. Tender spots on my arms, on my hips. Places that shouldn't have hurt. Places that didn't make sense. I told myself I'd bumped into something. Maybe I fell. Maybe I was just getting old, clumsy. But inside I knew. I knew it wasn't just bruises. It was fear. It was dread. And it was growing. I started going to bed fully dressed. I locked my door at night. And still, some mornings I'd wake up and something would feel wrong. My clothes shifted. My sheets moved. That awful feeling of being touched, but not held. Handled, not loved. It's like your skin knows before your brain can catch up. It's not just physical. It's spiritual. You feel like something's been stolen. A piece of you. And it doesn't come back. I wanted so badly to tell someone. My husband was just down the hall. The man I've shared a lifetime with. But how do you say those words? How do you look him in the eyes and say, I think our son is hurting me? I was ashamed. I felt disgusting. I kept asking myself, how did it come to this? What did I miss? I'd raised him. I'd loved him. I was his mother. And somehow, in all of that, I had become his victim. There was one night I'll never forget. I had fallen asleep in the living room. I was too afraid to go upstairs. I thought maybe if I stayed there with the lights on, he wouldn't come near me. I remember waking up suddenly, and I could hear footsteps. Not loud but heavy. Controlled. Moving through the dark. My heart started pounding and I froze. I didn't want to breathe too loudly. I didn't want to move. I laid there, pretending to sleep, hoping he'd just go away. That was the moment everything inside me broke. Because I knew it wasn't my imagination anymore. I knew it wasn't confusion or age or stress. It was real. It was him. And I was no longer safe. After that night I didn't sleep much. I sat up most evenings with a lamp on, pretending to read or knit, but mostly just watching the door. Listening. Waiting. I felt like a stranger in my own home. Prisoner. Trapped in silence. I started writing things down, the dates, what I felt when I woke up, the bruises. I didn't know what I would do with it, but I needed to get it out of my head. I needed to remind myself I wasn't crazy. That this was happening. And I wasn't imagining it. I stopped hugging him. I stopped letting him stand too close. And I saw the change in his face. The tension, the calculation. He knew I was pulling away. He knew I was figuring it out. And that scared me even more. Because what happens when the person who's hurting you realizes you're no longer afraid to see them for who they are? And still I said nothing. I walked around that house each day pretending like things were fine. Cooking dinner. Folding laundry. Talking to my husband about the garden. But inside I was unraveling. Quietly. Slowly. I felt like I was disappearing, like I was becoming smaller each day. That's what trauma does. It doesn't just bruise the body. It bruises the soul. Convinces you that you're alone. That no one will believe you. That somehow this is your fault. But it wasn't my fault. I wish I had said something sooner. I wish I had trusted my instincts the first time I woke up and felt like something wasn't right. I wish I hadn't waited until the silence was louder than the truth. But fear makes you wait. Shame makes you hide. And when the pain is coming from someone you gave life to, it warps everything you think you know about love. Still, even in all that darkness, something inside me stayed awake. Something that refused to give up, refused to stay silent forever. I didn't know it yet, but that quiet strength, that flicker of fight, was going to save my life. People often think pain is loud. Screaming, breaking, crashing. But real pain, the kind that burrows into your bones, is often silent. It shows up in the way your hands shake when you pour a cup of tea. In the way your smile falters just a little too long. In the way you suddenly can't recognize yourself in the mirror. That's what it was like in those weeks. Living with a pain that had no name and nowhere to go. The worst part wasn't just what was happening at night. It was what it did to me during the day. Hollowed me out. I'd wake up with my chest tight, my body aching, and this heaviness behind my eyes that wouldn't lift. I'd force myself to move through the house, make breakfast, tidy up, maybe step outside and water the plants, but everything felt like walking underwater. I wasn't living. I was surviving. Quietly. Slowly. And I remember thinking, is this what life is now? Is this what I've come to? To be afraid in my own home. To dread the night. To wonder when he'll come into my room next. To lie beside my husband and not say a word, because the shame is louder than the truth. I carried that shame like a second skin. And it was so heavy. I kept thinking, I'm a mother. How could I let this happen? I was supposed to protect him, teach him, guide him, not be afraid of him. And yet here I was, tiptoeing around my own son, afraid to fall asleep, afraid to speak, afraid of what it meant to admit the truth. The emotional toll didn't just stay in my head. My body started to change too. I lost weight, not on purpose but because food didn't taste like anything anymore. I stopped cooking the big meals I used to love making. I'd stand in front of the stove and forget what I was doing. My husband would ask, "Are you all right?" And I'd smile and say, "Just tired." Always tired. That became my answer to everything. But it wasn't tiredness, it was grief. Grief for the life I had, for the son I thought I knew, and for the parts of me that had been taken while I slept. There were days I felt like I was vanishing. I'd walk past a mirror and not recognize the woman staring back at me. Her eyes were dull, her shoulders slumped, her hands always fidgeting. I used to be so sure of myself. I used to be warm. I laughed more. I loved my home. I took care of everyone. And now I was the one who needed taking care of, but I didn't know how to ask. What made it worse was the isolation. Not just physically but emotionally. I felt like I was living a double life. To the outside world, I was just a sweet old lady with a quiet house and a grown son trying to get back on his feet. But inside everything was breaking. I couldn't call a friend. What would I say? My son comes into my room at night and I'm afraid to sleep. Even just thinking the words made my stomach turn. I convinced myself no one would believe me. Or worse, that they would believe me, and I'd have to watch the disgust in their faces. Watch them look at me like I was broken. And the truth is, I was broken. But I kept going. I kept sweeping the kitchen floor. Kept folding laundry. Kept pretending. Because sometimes pretending is the only way to get through the day. Sometimes you put on your sweater, fix your hair, and try to look like a version of yourself that no longer exists. And you pray no one notices the cracks. But the cracks were there. And they were spreading. There were moments when I'd catch my husband watching me. Really watching me. He could see something was wrong. He's known me long enough to sense when something's off. He asked more than once, "Is something bothering you?" And I wanted to tell him. God, I wanted to tell him. But every time I tried, the words got stuck in my throat. Because saying it out loud meant admitting it was real. And I wasn't ready. I didn't feel strong enough yet. So instead I cried in the shower. I flinched when I heard footsteps behind me. I jumped when doors creaked open at night. And all the while I told myself, just get through today. One more day, But that's not living. That's not surviving. That's drowning slowly while pretending you're okay. And I knew deep down. The longer I stayed silent, the more of me I'd lose. There's something that happens when you've held on to a secret for too long. It starts to wear you down in places you didn't even know could break. I had spent weeks, maybe months, living with this quiet terror, and it was like every breath I took came with a weight. I wanted so badly to tell someone, to tell him. My husband, the man who had been by my side for over 4 decades. But every time I tried, the words just dissolved inside me. And then it happened in a way I wasn't prepared for. It was a Thursday. I remember because my husband had been out at his usual card game with the men from the senior center, and I was alone in the house. I hated those nights more than anything, but I never told him that. I didn't want to raise suspicions. Didn't want to seem anxious. I kept trying to live like nothing was wrong, even when everything was. That night, I stayed on the living room couch again, lights on, door slightly cracked open. I didn't fall asleep, at least not deeply. My nerves were too frayed for that by then. But I must have drifted off at some point, because when I opened my eyes, he was there. My son. Standing there. Staring. Not saying a word. Froze. My whole body did. And for the first time I saw it. Not just the figure of my child but the emptiness in his face. Whatever boy I had raised was gone. And in that moment, I didn't feel love or sorrow or even confusion anymore. Felt something colder. Something sharp. Something like anger bubbling under my skin after being buried for too long. And that's when my husband walked in. I hadn't heard the door open, but I saw the look on his face. He didn't say anything at first. Just stood there in the doorway, eyes flicking between us. Me curled up on the couch, my son standing too close, too still. There was a pause, just a breath, and I saw something change in him. He didn't yell. He didn't ask questions. He just moved. He stepped in front of me so fast I barely registered it. And he said my name, gently, but with a kind of urgency I hadn't heard from him in years. Then he turned to our son, and I saw his hands clench into fists. But he didn't hit him. Well, my husband's anger is the kind that simmers deep. The kind that doesn't need violence to make itself known. He asked one question. "What have you done?" There was silence. And then my son laughed. Just a little. Just enough to make my blood run cold. That laugh told us everything we needed to know. It wasn't nervous. It wasn't embarrassed. It was empty. Careless. Like he wasn't even really there anymore. Like he'd stopped seeing us as people. My husband told him to get out. Right then and there. No yelling. No struggle. Just a voice so full of something final that it didn't leave room for argument. And for the first time I saw my son hesitate. He looked between us like he was trying to decide something, and then he left. I sat there frozen. My whole body shaking. My husband knelt in front of me and held my face in his hands. He said, "Tell me what he did." And I broke. Everything I'd held in came spilling out. Not in perfect sentences or even full thoughts. Just pieces. Fragments of fear, of nights I couldn't forget, of bruises I'd tried to explain away. I sobbed so hard I could barely breathe, and still he held me. Not once did he pull away. Not once did he question me. He cried too. I hadn't seen him cry in years. But he did that night. Quietly. Steadily. For me. For the son we thought we knew. For the life we built that now had cracks running through its foundation. And in that moment something shifted. The shame started to lift. Not all at once. But I could feel it, just enough to breathe again. Because I wasn't alone anymore. Because someone else finally knew. Someone believed me. The next morning we changed the locks. We called a lawyer. We spoke with someone at a crisis center. Every step we took felt terrifying, but it also felt like taking pieces of my power back one by one. I still remember the way my husband looked at me the day we filed the report. He took my hand and said, "You didn't deserve this. And you're not going to carry it alone." And just like that I started to feel like maybe I could heal. Maybe I could come back from this. Because love, real love, doesn't run away when things get hard. It doesn't hide when the truth is ugly. Stands with you. Even when the person you need protection from is your own blood. And that night, for the first time in weeks, I slept without fear. Healing doesn't happen all at once. It doesn't arrive like a sudden sunrise or a perfect answer. Comes in pieces. Some small, some so sharp they hurt before they heal. After everything came out, after my husband saw the truth and stood beside me, there was this strange stillness. Like we were both holding our breath, waiting to see what would come next. For a while, I thought that once the locks were changed, once our son was gone from the house, things would just go back to normal. I thought I could light a candle, wash the bedsheets, tidy the living room, and erase what had been done. But it doesn't work like that. There's no rewind. No clean slate. Because when someone crosses that line, when they steal from you in the dark, What they leave behind isn't just pain. It's doubt. It's memory. It's the echo of your own silence. The days that followed were heavy, quiet but not peaceful. I kept expecting him to knock on the door, to show up angry or apologetic or something in between. But he didn't. He vanished like a shadow. No phone calls, no messages. And that silence. It was almost worse than the nights I used to fear. Because it left me alone with my thoughts, questioning everything. Wondering how a son I raised with love could look at me and see anything less than human. My husband tried to keep things steady. He cooked more. He made sure I sat out on the porch with my tea. He filled the bird feeders, read the newspaper aloud, asked me how I was feeling even when he could already see it on my face. And I appreciated all of it. I did. But inside, I was unraveling in a quieter way now. Because when the threat leaves, that's when the grief begins. It wasn't just grief for what had happened to me. It was grief for him too, for my son. For the boy who used to fall asleep in my lap. For the young man who once told me I was the only person who ever truly understood him. I kept going back through memories like flipping through old photo albums, looking for signs I'd missed, for moments that might have hinted at what he would become. I blamed myself in 1,000 different ways. Maybe I was too soft. Maybe I gave too many chances. Maybe I saw what I wanted instead of what was real. But even as I sat with that pain, something in me began to shift. A slow, steady realization that I wasn't the same woman who had stayed quiet for so long. I had spoken. I had faced it. I had survived. And that survival wasn't something small. It wasn't just breathing. It was the refusal to be erased. To be silenced. There was a morning, not long after everything broke open, when I stood in front of the mirror and saw my own eyes staring back with a different kind of clarity. I had always thought of myself as gentle, as kind, as someone who gave more than she took. But in that moment, I also saw someone who had endured. Someone who had been through hell and still chose to live. So I started taking small steps. I began writing again. Not just in the journal where I had tracked the worst nights, but in little letters to myself. Letters that said things like, asterisk, you did the right thing. You're not to blame. You still matter. Asterisk, I would read them aloud, even if my voice shook. And some days it did. But I read them anyway. My husband and I also talked more, really talked. We stopped avoiding the hard parts. He told me how angry he still felt. How helpless he had felt that night when he saw his wife looking terrified on the couch. He told me he wished he'd seen the signs sooner. And I told him I didn't need him to be perfect. I just needed him to stay with me. And he did. That became our promise to each other. We would stay. No more silence. No more pretending. I wish I could say I forgave my son. That I found a neat bow to wrap this whole thing up in. But the truth is, I'm still working on that. Some days I think about the little boy I used to hold, and I cry for what he lost inside himself. Other days I feel a fire rise in my chest, knowing that he took something from me I can never get back. Healing isn't clean. It's not even always kind. But it is possible. It's real. And it starts when you stop running from the truth. Some wounds may always leave a mark. But they don't get to define me. Not anymore. People often ask me how I kept going. They say, how did you get through something like that? How do you move on? And I'll be honest with you. There were days I didn't think I would. There were mornings when I didn't want to get out of bed, when the thought of putting on my clothes and walking out into the kitchen felt like climbing a mountain. There were nights I sat on the edge of the bathtub, staring at my hands, wondering how they could still be steady after all they had endured. But I did get through. Not all at once, not with some grand revelation. It happened one fragile moment at a time. One breath. One step. One decision to keep choosing myself, even when I didn't feel strong. You see, there's a kind of strength people don't talk about enough. The strength of facing something that tried to break you and refusing to disappear. It's not loud. It doesn't look like a victory parade. It looks like sitting in silence and letting yourself cry without apology. It looks like speaking up even when your voice shakes. It looks like asking for help when you've spent your whole life being the helper. I used to think strength meant staying quiet, that it meant holding everything in so no one would worry. But that's not strength, that's survival. And there's a difference. Surviving is what I did for months. It's what so many people do every single day, just trying to make it to the next moment. But healing, real healing, begins when you stop just surviving and decide to live again. I remember the first time I laughed after everything. It wasn't planned. It wasn't even about anything funny. My husband said something while trimming the roses, something about how they always bloom better when he talks to them like they're old friends. And I laughed, just a little, just enough for it to surprise me. And then I cried, because I realized I hadn't laughed in weeks, maybe longer. And suddenly, something opened up in me. A crack in the grief, just wide enough to let the light in. That's how it begins, these tiny moments of reclaiming yourself. I started going for walks again. I called my sister, even though I didn't tell her everything. I baked a peach pie, even though I wasn't hungry. And each time I did one of those small things, I felt a piece of myself return. Eventually I found a support group. Women like me, older women who had experienced trauma that no one wanted to talk about. And in that room, for the first time, I said it out loud to strangers. I said what had happened. I told them the truth. And they didn't flinch. They didn't look away. They just nodded like they understood. And for the first time, I didn't feel ashamed. Felt seen. That's something I want to say to anyone listening, to anyone who has ever been hurt by someone they trusted, by someone they loved. You are not alone. You're not crazy. You're not weak. And you didn't deserve it. None of it was your fault. Not the silence. Not the fear. Not the way you tried to pretend it wasn't happening. You did what you had to do to survive. And now you deserve to heal. I still carry it with me, of course. There are moments when something triggers it. A sound in the hallway, a look in someone's eyes. But I've learned not to run from it. I've learned to sit with it, to breathe through it, to remind myself that I am safe now. That I spoke up. That I was believed. That I am not that terrified woman lying still on the couch, waiting for it to stop. I am the woman who stood up. The woman who found her voice. The woman who reclaimed her life. And my husband, he's still here. He's been my anchor through every wave. Some days we sit in the quiet and don't need to say anything. Other days we talk about it all. The hurt, the healing, the grief for a son we lost long before we knew it. But through it all we've stayed side by side. And that has been one of the greatest mercies of my life. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if my son will ever reach out again. I don't know what I would say if he did. But I do know this. I will never be silent again. I will never shrink myself to make others comfortable. I will never deny my pain to protect someone else's image. 'Cause my story matters. My voice matters. And if I had to walk through that darkness to stand here and say this to you, then I'll keep speaking. Because if even one person hears this and feels less alone, then none of it was in vain.